to talk about how should those researchers who go for narrative approach go about when they write their texts. That's the issue about the researcher's visibility in the research text. You know, in this talk I have given, I have devoted quite a substance of this talk to talk about myself. Is that good or bad? Well, you need to reflect upon this because, and here Van Manen have written some very insightful things about this, the problems with confessional takes. If you write a whole book about your own confessions, the problems you had with your mother and your father, and so in very much detail, the reader will not be very much more enlightened about his or her practical situation. Somewhat maybe if the reader have had similar experience with his or her mother or father, but you know, the text is probably not about how you were brought up, but it is about something, and you need to address what you talk about and make yourself visible in relation to that, so that your own story does not kill your message or what you really have found out being of relevance for the practical world. Yeah, and then something about collecting life stories. That is also an interesting topic for me, because life stories are of many different kinds. Polkinghorne says in his book that every life story told by a living being is an open story, because I told a version of my life story earlier here, but maybe 2 years later I will consider that version of my life story not to be so valid anymore, so I will adjust it. And this is the idea that it's open for revision. Berthaud, who was one of the pioneers in narrative research, collecting life stories from French bakeries in the 1980s, I think it was. He talks about topical life stories. I also used this in my dissertation because I faced a problem doing my PhD too, because there was a lot of clients which I could have put into my thesis, but I chose not to. Instead, I went to small business manager I was not familiar with and asked them to give their story about how they started their business and what how their life as small business managers had been. So that is more or less what those topical life stories, which also was interesting, because what you found out when you do such things, that is, you find some of the small business managers that have waited for someone to listen to this story, while for others, maybe at the moment not very satisfied with their business, they would rather tell the stories about how they met their wife, or something, a lot of possible stories, but not the story about their small business. So that's a complication you have to deal with as narrative researchers. Then you have family life stories. I think there is often a very good idea if you do research on family businesses, which I am involved in to a certain extent, that if you get the story of one member of the family, of course you have one story. If you meet the same person the second time, you might get a more full story or a revised story. But if you go to the brother or the sister or the mother or the cousin of this, you may get a completely different story. This is both tricky but also very exciting, of course. Lastly, McAdams. I think this is a reference on my last slide. It's a reference to Polkinghorne and McAdams. I think McAdams had written a quite interesting book because his message is that we as humans live by different myths, and therefore when we tell our stories, we more or less relate to some genre. It might be a tragic, it might be a comic, it might be a romantic story. Some of us tend to tell our stories as romances. It's very much in it. Narrative inquiry is a very interesting field. There are many things to talk about related to narrative inquiry, which I have not even touched here. But now I think my time is gone, so thank you for listening.
Thank you. From my understanding of the narrative approach, I feel that these two professors stem from different traditions. One is more like quantitative, the other maybe starting as a quantitative researcher, but then moving toward qualitative. And like I said, I think if you are supporting this narrative inquiry approach, it does not mean you do not agree with what the quantitative researchers do, but it's about time that we do not focus on the quantitative research, but let's just focus on the narrative inquiry. And from what I understand, I think it's about sense making and about the process of taking research, right? Doing research, and that is why when you say, well, different researchers, they work on the same research of business, right? Maybe they study the same entrepreneur, but then they come up with different interpretations. And I think that's because when we talk about social sciences, it involves people, right? And that is different from the research you do in the laboratory. Experiments in the laboratory, lab. It's different. And when it comes to people, you just have to appreciate that we're so different, and you have to appreciate that we have different interpretations, and that is about narrative inquiry. That's what my understanding is. I'm sorry.
Question? Okay. So, thank you for your your listening, and thank you, Professor Johansson. And I think because of the time limit, and we need to stop. And there's a coffee break. Maybe like water, hot water. Right, yeah. And if you have any questions, I know for how much you know, we would like to have something under the table. So if you have any questions, you can ask. Thank you for your time. 个案讨论时呢，套这个哈佛大学系，但是麦克风掉没有，这个常常是问题。这个严老师还有王老师以及在座的各位老师，那非常高兴大家能够来参与这个论坛。那我觉得我们把这个论坛的形式呢定义成这个轻松一点，因为我想叙说探究它其实是一个非常多元的，像刚刚那个Johansson教授的。那我认为它主要是从经验出发，就是我们每一位研究者，如果你对学术工作有commitment的话，那你在这里面，在你的研究的过程中间所感受到的经验，我觉得都会成为很重要的素材。只是说呢，就好像你在什么时候会去把它呈现出来而已。那所以我想我们今天就比较轻松的来这个分享大家的经验。那我刚才已经讲过了一点点了我们想就从那个连老师开始。